Laurelton, Queens, 1938. A Jewish neighborhood where the air smelled like ambition and the sidewalks were full of people who believed that if you worked hard enough, you could outrun where you came from. Bernie Madoff believed that too. He just had a different definition of work. At 22, Bernie Madoff started his own firm with $5,000 he'd saved as a sprinkler installer and lifeguard. Not borrowed, not inherited, saved. He called it Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. It was 1960. He had no Wall Street connections, no Ivy League degree, no mentor with a Rolodex. What he had was something rarer, the ability to make people feel safe. And on Wall Street, safe is the most dangerous thing you can sell. Bernie didn't start as a criminal. That's the part people miss. For 2 decades, he built a legitimate business. He pioneered electronic trading, the technology that would eventually become NASDAQ. He served as NASDAQ chairman twice. Regulators respected him. Banks trusted him. When Bernie Madoff said a thing was true, people wrote it down. He wasn't just inside the system, he was the system. And that's exactly what made what came next so catastrophic. Nobody knows the exact moment Bernie crossed the line. Some say it was the early 90s recession. Some say it was the 1987 crash. Some say he never ran a legitimate investment operation at all, that the fraud began in the 1970s and the legitimate business was always just the mask. What we know is this: at some point, Bernie stopped investing his clients' money. He just stopped. The money came in, he deposited it, he sent back fake account statements showing steady, impressive returns, year after year. Bull market, bear market, recession, recovery, 10 to 12%. Clockwork. Impossible. Beautiful. How do you always deliver consistent returns? Discipline, risk management, timing. But even in down years? Quiet smile. Especially in down years. That consistency was the product. When the market dropped 40%, Bernie's clients lost nothing. When the dot-com bubble burst and people were jumping out of windows on Park Avenue, Madoff clients were sleeping soundly. They didn't ask how. They didn't want to know how. They just wanted more. He called it a split-strike conversion strategy. It was sophisticated-sounding nonsense. The real strategy: take money from new investors, pay old investors, repeat. A Ponzi scheme, the oldest fraud in finance, named after Charles Ponzi, who ran his version in 1920. Bernie Madoff ran his version for nearly 50 years. The clientele wasn't random. Bernie was selective, exclusive. You couldn't just walk in with a check and ask to invest. You had to be invited. He cultivated Jewish country clubs, Palm Beach, Long Island, the Hamptons. He played golf, attended galas, sat on charity boards. He was discreet, understated, never flashy. Bernie doesn't take just anyone, they'd whisper. Getting in is the hard part. Once you're in, you're set for life. The exclusivity was the pitch. Scarcity dressed up as prestige. And the people who got in, they told everyone, proudly. Holocaust survivor funds, charitable foundations, hospital endowments, Steven Spielberg's foundation, Elie Wiesel's foundation, banks in Europe, hedge funds that fed billions into Bernie's hands without asking a single serious question. The Fairfield Greenwich Group alone funneled $7.2 billion into Madoff's fund, charging their own clients fees for the privilege of doing so. Nobody asked to audit the books. Nobody asked to visit the trading floor. Nobody asked why, in an era of digital transparency, Bernie's statements arrived by mail. They trusted him. And trust Bernie understood better than anyone is the one thing you can never manufacture. You can only steal it. By 2008, Bernie Madoff was managing, or appearing to manage, $65 billion in client assets. It was the largest Ponzi scheme in human history. And for decades, the warnings were there. His name was Harry Markopolos, a financial analyst who spent 9 years submitting detailed fraud reports to the SEC, explaining mathematically why Madoff's returns were impossible. The SEC investigated twice. They found nothing. Not because there was nothing to find, because they weren't actually looking. His numbers don't work. You can't generate these returns with this strategy. The math is impossible. Mr. Markopolos, are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting. I'm telling you, this is fraud. I have 17 red flags. We'll look into it. They didn't. Then came September 2008. Lehman Brothers collapsed. The global financial system began to seize. Clients everywhere, panicked, started calling in redemptions. Bernie got $7 billion in withdrawal requests in a single week. He had $234 million left. The math that had held for half a century finally ran out. December 9th, 2008, Bernie called his sons, Mark and Andrew, into his apartment. He told them everything. They called their lawyers before morning. The next day, federal agents knocked on Bernie Madoff's door. "Is there an innocent explanation for what you've done?" Bernie looked at them. No. He turned himself in. No chase, no flight, no private plane to a non-extradition country. He just surrendered. Because maybe after 50 years of performing confidence, he was simply tired. The fallout was biblical. $65 billion, 37,000 victims in 136 countries, charities dissolved overnight, retirees who'd handed over their entire savings, families who'd invested through generations. One investor, René Thierry Magan de la Villouche, locked himself in his New York office 2 weeks after the arrest and took his own life. He had lost $1.4 billion of his clients' money. He felt responsible. Bernie Madoff felt nothing. At least, nothing he ever said out loud. In June 2009, Bernie Madoff stood before a federal judge. He pled guilty to 11 federal crimes: fraud, money laundering, perjury, theft. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison. The courtroom erupted in applause. "I am deeply sorry and ashamed," he said. The victims didn't believe him, probably because he'd spent 50 years being deeply unashamed. Mark Madoff, his eldest son, hanged himself on December 11, 2010, exactly 2 years to the day after his father's arrest. Andrew Madoff died of cancer in 2014. Bernie never saw either of them again after the day they turned him in. Bernie Madoff died in federal prison in April 2021 at age 82. The restitution fund has recovered roughly $14 billion, barely a fraction of what was lost. There were no movie rights sold, no memoir published while he was free, no motivational speaker arc, no podcast, no brand redemption tour. Just a slow death inside a federal prison, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he built. And maybe that's the only real difference between him and the others. Belfort got the movie. Madoff got the obituary. But here's what keeps you up at night. Bernie Madoff wasn't charming in the obvious way. He didn't scream and throw $100 bills across a boiler room. He didn't drive a Lamborghini or name a yacht after his wife. He wore a gray suit. He shook your hand firmly. He looked you in the eye and told you nothing interesting at all. And that was the con. Because we know how to protect ourselves from the loud ones, from the wolfish grin and the hot tip and the too good to be true. We don't know how to protect ourselves from the quiet ones, the ones who look like the system, the ones the regulators trust, the ones your father trusted, the ones who are boring enough to be believed. Bernie Madoff stole more money than any individual in financial history. He did it with a spreadsheet and a smile. And for 50 years, we didn't just let him. We lined up at the door and begged to get in. I knew something was wrong, one victim said years later. I just didn't want to be the one who said it out loud. That's the real lesson. Not greed, not naivety, not even failure of regulation. Silence. The comfortable, complicit silence of people who were winning and didn't want to ask why. Bernie Madoff didn't just steal your money. He stole your willingness to ask questions. And you let him.